And we've realized we have to put our disciplines together. We're all sort of separated at universities, but now we have to study the planet as one system.
Jag tänker börja 2019, Klimatforum 2019, med att tänka på 2018. Det kan ju vara lite bakvänt, men ibland är det så. Även om framrutan är större än bakrutan så är det bra att blicka bakåt ibland för att veta vad man ska ta med sig och vad man definitivt inte ska ta med sig. Vad minns ni från 2018? Reflektera över det bara ett par sekunder. Vad minns ni från 2018 när det gäller klimatpolitiken? Tänker ni på IPCCs 1,5 grads snack? Tänker ni på skolstrejken? Tänker ni på skogsbränderna? Tänker ni på meteorologerna? Martin Hedberg här. Tänker ni på meteorologerna som dag efter dag stod, åh vilket fantastiskt väder vi har. När man sitter och biter på naglarna och tänker, vad fan det här är ju kris. Det här man borde inte prata om värmerekord i någon sorts positiv anda. Själv minns jag när plötsligt jag insåg, ska vi grilla älskling? Och jag bara, ja jag går hem och tar fram lite kött. Och så insåg jag plötsligt att kött som alltid har varit någonting positivt. Man grillar, man står och gör lite köttfärslimpa till familjen. Och kött har alltid varit någonting positivt, någonting trevligt, någonting kopplat till fest. Men där och då så hade det plötsligt tipping point över till att klanga i min hjärna och mitt känsloliv som någonting negativt. Förstår ni vad jag menar? Kött, när jag sa det, lät dåligt plötsligt. Är det någon annan än jag som fick den upplevelsen under 2018? Räck upp en hand får vi se. Ja, det är några. Jag tror inte att vi är ensamma om det. Vad lustigt det är. Det är inte så att jag är vegan eller på något sätt nu jävlar ska jag sluta äta kött. Utan plötsligt, sakta men säkert. Jag äter mindre kött. Jag blandar ut på tacofredagen så blandar jag ut köttfärsen mot vegofärs så att familjen liksom inte ska märka mer och mer vego och mindre köttfärs. Så på en månad här nu så har vi liksom gått från bara lite till hälften och nästa månad så kommer det vara bara vegofärs. Men att någonstans har jag jobbat med det och där och då någonstans i höstas så bara pang. Fan kött, det låter ju till och med äckligt. Så, ja. Väl, vi går vidare. Vad står då klimatförändringarna idag någonstans? Vad säger den senaste forskningen? Vad talar man om när man diskuterar det här på FNs klimatpanel om möjligheten att hålla den här temperaturökningen under 1,5 grad? Nu ska vi få träffa två personer som vet väldigt mycket om det. Och det är en stolthet som både jag och Aktuell hållbarhet och Naturvårdsverket känner när vi nu presenterar Will Steffen och Martin Hedberg. Woop, woop, woop. Ja, upp och hoppa.
Tack så mycket.
Tjenare. Martin,
Hej,
Will,
Fredrik.
welcome. Ja, du pratar svenska?
Nej, bara lite grann.
Bara lite, okej. Okay. So we'll keep it
En blandning is from.
En blandning, all right. Good. So Will, you represent Stockholm Resilience Center.
Yes, part-time and Australian National University in Canberra.
Yes, so you are Australian
Yes.
to begin with. Okay. But you are also an Earth system scientist, va? From my point of view, that's the coolest thing. It sounds really cool.
It is cool.
It is. So what is it?
Well, it's looking at our whole planet like a single system, like our body. Our body has circulation systems. It has a blood circulation system, has respiratory, has nervous system. But together we are one system, and we have a healthy temperature, and if it goes too high, we have to see the doctor, and if it goes too high, we die. The planet is exactly like that. It has an ocean circulation system, atmosphere, land, but it behaves. They're all linked, and we are one system. So over the last 20, 30 years, scientists have realized this, and we've realized we have to put our disciplines together. We're all sort of separated at universities, but now we have to study the planet as one system.
Self-evident, you should believe.
It is self-evident.
But so far it hasn't really been that way.
That's right.
Okay. Och Martin, meteorolog, mycket driven. Du är också klimatanalytiker.
Det var inte någon som stod och sa, vad härligt att det har blivit varmare och torrare i skogsbränder. Jag vill bara säga det.
Det var du verkligen inte. Nej. Och det har du aldrig gjort, ska jag säga också. Ja, nej, klimatanalytiker. Alltså, jag vet också att du skriver ju artiklar. Och skriva artiklar kan man göra på olika sätt. Om man gör det liksom i tyngre tidningar så kräver det väldigt mycket. Man ska få godkännande. Folk ska liksom vedimera och hej och hå. Och är det inte så, din stackare, att sådana där artiklar tenderar att bli väldigt urvattnade därför att man inte får trampa folk på tårna. Det ska vara politiskt korrekt. Det ska vara hit och dit sådär. Så att till slut så blir det inte så jävla mycket som ni forskare och analytiker egentligen skulle vilja säga, skulle vilja skriva.
Idag presenterar vi på DN Debatt en artikel där 270 forskare signerar ett upprop där vi stödjer den manifestationen som klimatstrejken och Greta Thunberg står för. 270!
Äntligen!
För det är precis, absolut, man måste förhålla sig korrekt och det måste vara tillräckligt vasst för att säga någonting, men det får inte vara för vasst för att vara på något sätt kunna kritiseras för att vara felaktigt och så vidare. Men nu vetenskapen är så fantastiskt tydlig i hur stora de här frågorna är, hur bråttom det är att göra någonting åt det, så att det är ingenting att tveka om.
Skönt. Äntligen.
Vad skönt säger du. Det är förfärligt att det behöver vara så. Men ändå, det är skönt att det samlas kring det här. Nu måste vi göra grejer bara.
Sant. Ja, att det går till handling.
Jopp.
Ja. Okej, ni ska få gå till handling. I'm gonna leave the stage to you guys.
Ja.
So take it away.
Thank you.
Tack Fredrik.
Stort tack för förtroendet att få vara här. All right, you're in control of that?
That's an Earth system scientist.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like we're in a fork in the road. I mean, we're not doing enough to mitigate climate change and other threats to the environment. But at the same time, we're not doing enough to prepare for the consequences that we know will happen.
Yes. And this year we can actually see what those consequences are. So this is what's happening in Australia. This is this year, 2019. This is North Queensland. The regional city of Townsville, maybe 200,000 people, totally flooded. Townsville got more rain in 5 or 6 days than the entire annual average. That's never happened before. And we can go to the south. That's Tasmania, right in the south of Australia. Those were World Heritage forests, beautiful forest, lots of wildlife, burnt to the ground. Why? Temperature was upper 30s, it was dry, lightning came, and away went the forest. And this is a map of Australia. Those reds and browns are temperatures over 40 degrees Celsius. That map encompasses only 2 weeks in January 2019. And all of those places, 80% of the continent had temperatures over 40 degrees during that 2-week period. Never happened before. All 3 of those events happened within a couple of weeks. We've never seen them before. So Australians are starting to wake up that one of our biggest industries, coal, actually has to finish.
Yeah. So coal is the problem, but you're dependent on it, your economy, et cetera, and there's lots of excuses to continue to dig up the carbon. But I know there's been a court ruling out one carbon mine.
Yeah,
Can you tell us something about that?
That's right. So citizens in Australia are really getting cranked up about this. And so a group of citizens not far from Sydney put in a court case against a proposed new coal mine. And I was asked to give expert testimony to the court on the climate implications. This was the first time that we know of in Australian legal history where the environmental issues were not just local coal dust, they were global. And so I made one simple argument that any scientific analysis says emissions have to be going like that very steeply. You cannot reduce emissions by increasing them. All right, that's obvious. That's obvious in any language. Even legal language, you can understand this argument. And the judgment came out, and primarily on climate change grounds, the coal mine was blocked. So we think this could actually be a precedent in Australia with a large number of proposals for new coal mines. But the industry is getting worried that the tide is turning and that people are understanding with flooding, heat, fires, we can't simply continue to put more CO2 in the atmosphere.
Okay, so when we stop adding CO2 to the atmosphere, the climate change will stabilize, or?
Well, it's sort of like stopping a very, very long train or trying to turn a battleship. You have to decide well before the time you want to stop that train or turn that ship that you're going to do it. So we have to do that as well. I can show you some graphs here. That's our consumption globally of coal. So it's emissions from coal, oil, and gas, all fossil fuels. That's the gray, and land use change. So you see, mainly from 1950, it's going up and up and up and up. And we've got to turn that around. And to do that, we can't do it tomorrow. We have to decide today and put in place the policies and legal instruments to do it. But it's going to take some time. And same with temperature. There's air temperature. That's ocean temperature. You see, they're exactly the same curves as the greenhouse gas emissions. In Australia, we still have a few so-called skeptics, but any reasonable human being can understand what's going on here. So I think, Martin, the point is, if we want to decarbonize or get the climate stabilized by mid-century, the decisions have to be made now, and the policies have to be put in place.
And we have to be quite clear, it's not just limiting the emissions, it's actually taking away carbon from the atmosphere.
We may have
and in order to do that, of course, you can't add more.
Yes, yes, we may have to learn how to take it out, but the first thing we have to do is stop putting it into the atmosphere in the first place.
Okay, so
anybody can understand.
We've been in this time for about 12,000 years called the Holocene, and now we are in the Anthropocene. I suppose you're all familiar with that. But I also know that Will Steffen was in that meeting when Paul Crutzen coined the phrase, the Anthropocene.
Yeah, that meeting was in 2001, so nearly 20 years ago now, and it was in Mexico. And it was a scientific committee meeting of a big international program, which actually had its headquarters in Stockholm. And so we were putting up graphs just like this, one after the other, of land use change, of nitrogen in the environment, of climate and so on, all going up and up and up. And Paul was getting really agitated and getting annoyed. And finally, he just burst out. He interrupted the person who was speaking and said, "Stop saying the Holocene," because they were talking about the Holocene, this Holocene. He said, "We aren't in the Holocene anymore." And then he stopped and said, "I better come up with a word." And so he was sort of stammering around. And then he said, we're in the Anthropocene." And that was the origin of the term. And that term and concept, I think, has had an enormous impact globally. Because now we realize, because of climate change and changes to the biosphere and so on, we are no longer in this beautiful 12,000-year period of stability in which humanity has developed villages, cities, agriculture, and so on. So he put the challenge to us that we need to rethink. We need to rethink all these problems like climate change. We need to rethink who we are, and we need to rethink the limits of the planet we live on.
Right. And then we have some sleeping giants. We have these, not only the Anthropocene, we have tipping points and tipping elements and teleconnections between everything, and we are definitely a part of that. You can...
Absolutely. One of the things I think we need to rethink a bit is we think of humans and the environment. But as an Earth system scientist, we are part of the Earth system. We evolved into the Earth system. We're interacting all the time. We're embedded in the biosphere. So we have to rethink how we look at things. And this is the sort of graph that we really do have to rethink. Because what this graph is showing us is that we are sort of thinking outside of the Earth system. This graph is very simple. It's just the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from about 1960 to the present. Those little blue bars is the rate at which that curve is going up. So here we have, particularly from about 1990, I've put what we scientists have done. We spend enormous amounts of time and money putting out information. And then I've put what the policy community has done. And it has not really made any difference at all. So whatever we're doing for the last 2-3 decades isn't working. That's why, Martin, I think these social tipping points are so important. We talk about tipping points in the biophysical system, tipping points in an ice sheet, or tipping points in the Amazon forest. But I think the important thing to talk about here is this human tipping point that we got to have.
But what is at risk? What could happen if these giant things like the ice sheets or the Amazon is collapsing? Would that be, or I know it won't be sort of isolated to only the Amazon or only the Gulf Stream or only but they are connected to each other.
Yeah, I think this is the next one. Yeah, we've done a little cartoon to try to describe those tipping points. So as Martin said, we have big forests like Amazon or the boreal forest up here in the north. We have ice both in the southern and northern hemispheres. We have circulation systems, but they all act together. So this little cartoon shows valleys and hills, and valleys can be cold valleys like an ice age, or they can be very hot valleys. And if the Earth falls into one, it's usually stuck there for a long time. Time comes out from the back of the little diagram to the front. So here we are in that little valley there. That's called the Holocene. We came out of the last ice age. And normally we would sit in that valley for maybe another 10 or 20,000 years. It's fairly stable, although it's little. But look where that arrow's going. We're now going off into a hotter part of this landscape where Earth hasn't been for a couple millions of years probably. And now we're just floating down. And what Martin was talking about is what we called a planetary threshold. It looks like a little cliff before you drop into this valley. And that threshold is made up of Amazon forest burning, putting carbon up. It's made of permafrost melting, putting carbon up. It's made of Arctic sea ice melting, absorbing more sunlight and heating the northern hemisphere. In fact, here in Sweden, particularly northern Sweden, you are warming twice the global average because of some of these effects. But these don't act in isolation. They sort of act like the Three Musketeers. They're all working together. And if you cross a point at which you start this cascade, this tipping a domino, 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 you won't stop it. Now, the critical question we scientists are grappling with is, where does this lie? And this is why I think Fredrik brought up a couple of times the 1.5 degree. Our best knowledge today says we are probably safe below 1.5, and we think we're really screwed above 3. We're not going to get back. So somewhere between 1.5 and 3, we go over the cliff, and then we don't get back for hundreds of thousands of years, probably. So there is more to this Paris target. There's more to this social tipping point. There's more to what Greta and the students are doing than simply a slightly warming world. It could be the difference between a world we can possibly live in and one we can't.
Right. Because until now, nature has been our friend, so absorbing things that we're messing around. Big things has happened before. I mean, climate changes for natural causes and has done for millions of years, so that's nothing new. And the changes in itself, they can be huge. I mean, during an ice age, there's a couple of thousand meters of frozen water above us here, and sea level is 100 meters lower, and that is only 4 degrees lower. So when we talk about 1 or 2 degrees, that, I mean, Paris Agreement, 2 degrees warmer, that's half an ice age, but in the opposite direction. Okay, but until now, nature has been kind of friendly, absorbing the shocks that we are producing. And so nature has actually had sort of negative feedbacks in the sense, in the physical sense, absorbing things. But you can, when you start passing the thresholds, you have the positive feedbacks, and then we are no longer in control. I don't want to say control, because we're not in control now either. No. But we're sort of sitting there on the side and then pulling the steering wheel, but...
Yeah, I think, Martin, that's a really good description, because the Earth system in general is pretty friendly. It likes to be in the state it's in. It has feedbacks. It tries to keep it there. And the tricky thing is, you don't see much change until you get close to that tipping point. And that's what worries me about what we're seeing in Australia. These records were not only broken, they were broken by a huge amount that scientists had never seen before in the records down there. So that's telling me that we might start between 1 and 1.5, be getting into dangerous territory. So that's what we want to avoid, is going over that cliff into hothouse Earth. Hothouse Earth would be 4, 5, or 6 degrees warmer, and we would be stuck there for a couple 100,000 years if we look at how the Earth has behaved in the past.
There's some phrases that we occasionally use, with, for instance, resource or control or things like that. I wanna state that, or can you say something about nature as a resource and our management of these resources? Yeah,
this I think is
the irony.
I think what Martin Hedberg is really important. It's a mind shift, a really fundamental mind shift, because we talk about resources. Australia's economy, up until recently, is about resources and resource management and so on. But that's not the right way to look at the Earth system. It's our home, and more than that, it's our life support system. So I never use the word resources, and I rarely ever use the word environment, because that puts you in these two different boxes of, all right, I'm in favor of developing resources. No, I want to protect the environment, usually meaning a piece of forest or a nice lake or something. We need to reconceptualize this planet as a life support system. That's what we need to be able to live decent lives, is a stable, accommodating life support system. For the first time in human history, this is now in danger because of our own activities.
And mainly the reason would be the ideas of exponential changes in an environment that does not adapt in the same speed.
Yeah, you've put your finger on it. Since World War II, really this idea that you have to have growth in economy, resource use, and so on. That you don't have a good life unless you're getting richer, and you can't get richer unless you exploit more, use more resources, make things out of it, consume them. This whole cycle of ever consuming more in terms of goods and services, actually it's a finite planet. And when we were only 1 billion or less, we could actually get away with that. But we are now 7.6 billion. And as my colleague and good friend Johan Rockström, whom a lot of you know, Johan had this beautiful book, You know, we used to be a small world on a big planet. We are now a big world on a small planet. And this changes everything.
Mm-hmm. But if you don't want to sort of accept that, I want growth, I want this kind of development, and we've been doing this for hundreds of years. But I think you need to get into your head that there will be consequences because, I mean, you and I can negotiate, but you cannot negotiate with nature. Things will happen. Right. And that's where the fork in the road that I was thinking of. We don't mitigate.
That fork in the road.
Yeah, we don't mitigate enough to avoid the consequences, but at the same time, we don't prepare ourselves for those consequences because they feel so scary. So we just put our head in the sand.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of psychologists tell me that's a sort of natural reaction. But I actually don't agree with that. And you can look at it in your personal life. I mean, I had a fairly close call in my own life medically when I had a fairly innocuous kidney problem. But the treatment actually was contaminated, and I got a very serious blood infection. And the doctor, the infections doctor at Canberra Hospital came in and said, all right, this is serious. This is a life-threatening virus. It can kill you in 24 hours. He said, we can get it under control, but you must do exactly what you say. What I didn't say to him was, oh, I don't want to hear bad news. Just tell me I've got a cold and I'll get better in 3 days. Take an aspirin or two. So we've got to get this mentality right. And in your own personal life, you do that. If you're in a life-threatening situation, we are wired to respond and we're wired to listen to advice and so on. And we scientists are sort of planetary physicians. And we're trying to say, this is a much harder concept, but it's the same basic thing, is that we are headed toward a life-threatening situation for a lot of life on planet Earth. And like my infections doctor, we actually have ways we can get out of this. But we have to make that decision, and this is what has to happen in the next year or two. We have to make the decision that we're going to do it. And we as a global society haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, so there's been, for decades, scientists have told us the situation actually, yeah. But society hasn't really adapted that. But I just want to say something about, or maybe you can say something about Donella Meadows and the leverage point, where to intervene in a system, because the system is changing too fast and accelerating in a lot of bad ways. And where should you intervene in that system in order to make changes?
Yeah, I mean, that's the critical question, Martin, is that we have a very complex system. It's this sort of coupled human natural world climate system that is evolving in these quite frightening directions. Some people say technology will save us. We just get carbon-saving cars, electric vehicles, this and that. I have a problem with that because economics usually shows if you save somewhere else, you consume more as a response to that, the Jevons paradox, and you end up actually pushing the problem even further up the ladder. I think we need to intervene, and that's where Donella Meadows comes in, at a very fundamental level, and that's our value system. It's time now that we think of what actually gives us a good life. And most people, when they're asked that, it's not consuming more, it's their relationships with each other. We're a highly social species, and actually with the natural world. So my comment here would be going back to the indigenous people of my continent who are really, really clear on what our role is. They said, our role is to look after country. That's their term for we have to look after the living world around us. And they say it's a big cycle. They actually use the word cycle. They said it's a big cycle of coming from the land, living in the land, enjoying it, and then going back to the land. And their job is to make sure that generation after generation, they can do that. That's the sort of value shift we need.
And it's not quite the value that we have today, which is driving these forces.
That's right, but it's a common value. When you look at human history, that's actually the more common value system than the one we've got today.
But isn't that sort of, you're begging for a conflict with the market or with technologies, etc.? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, look, I think if you want, and we do have markets, and indigenous peoples had markets. They traded things. The indigenous Australians were trading with Moluccans from Southeast Asia and so on. And so there's a market. But the guiding principle needs to change, right. And that's the point.
The purpose of the system and the values of the system. But you still have markets and you still have technology.
And you still trade and you still make things and all this sort of stuff. But it's in perspective of having a good life for yourselves and your families and looking after country.
Thank you very much. Will Steffen.